Today is June 6th, 2005, and I am Jessica Clark, the Teresa Mack Germans from Russia History Fellow and Coordinator for the Germans from Russia Oral History Project. It is a pleasure to visit with Lorraine Kleingartner in Gackle, North Dakota. Lorraine, can you state your full name and maiden name for the record?
It's Lorraine. My middle name is Halder, but I never use it.
Okay.
And my last maiden name we pronounce it Mueller, but
Okay.
it's spelled M-U-E-L-L-E-R.
And it's pronounced Miller.
Yeah.
Huh.
My grandfather always said that the U-E in German is the same as the I in English. That
Really?
was his explanation. If that was so, I don't know, but anyway, that's what he said.
I don't know. I'm trying to think back to my 101 German class, and I don't know if I can't.
I know a lot of people here pronounce it Mueller.
Miller? Okay.
They pronounce it Miller.
And then your married name?
Lorraine Kleingartner.
Kleingartner, okay. And when were you born?
November 30th, 1921.
And where?
Cullum. Farm south of Cullum.
Did your parents ever tell you any stories about your birth? Were you born?
No.
Were you born on a farm or?
I was born at home on the farm.
At a farm. Okay. Did a midwife come or did a doctor? Do you know?
Since we've had this, I've been thinking about it. There's so many things that I can't remember that my mom ever really talked about, and that was one thing. I know I can remember that I have 5 brothers, and the oldest one was 17 when I was born, and the youngest one was 7. And after having 5 boys, they couldn't decide what they were going to name me. My dad wanted to call me Wilhelmina, and Mom said, that's too long, let's call her Velma, and he said, that's only half a name. And once they said that my dad went to visit at one of my uncle's places, and one of the girls asked, what are you going to name the baby? And my dad says, we don't know yet. And he said, why don't you name her Lorraine? He came home and told Mom, and that's what they decided to call me then.
Really? Huh.
So, she talked about, I've been thinking there's so many things that my mom never ever talked about. So.
Do you know if there was a reason that your dad wanted to name you Wilhelmina?
Pardon?
Do you know if there was a reason your dad wanted to name you Wilhelmina?
I don't know. I had a great grandmother. Her name was Wilhelmina.
Oh, okay.
See, and I suppose that's where he
had wanted it. Okay.
I had a cousin named Velma, but he thought that. So anyway, it ended up being Lorraine.
What was it like growing up with 5 older brothers?
Well, I had no problem because my oldest brother, by that time, was working for one of the neighbors. We lived on a farm and had a small acreage, and we couldn't afford to, and I can't remember my second oldest brother working at home either. I had an uncle that didn't have any boys, and he worked for him for many, many years.
Okay.
But I can remember my older brother used to tease me that when he'd come home for a weekend or something, and he'd come home at night, then I'd be crying and he'd walk the floor with me. He teased me about that he had to walk the floor so that Mom could sleep. But I was never really, in my younger years, very close to any of my brothers because they were all a lot older than I was. And then my youngest brother, of course, he was in World War II, and then he was gone after that he was gone all the time. So I didn't. I was really after we were married, I was closer to my brothers than I was before.
Were they protective of you, being the little sister?
Yes. My youngest brother, uh, he had a girlfriend. The only way she could go along was if I was along with him, or else her dad wouldn't let her go.
Really?
So he appreciated it.
He helped you. You helped him get his foot in the door with his girlfriend's father, huh? Um, Thinking back to your early years as a child, what do you remember? What your first memory is, or around what you would think your first memories are?
Well, some of the things that I can remember is uh, we lived on a farm, and my mother always raised lots of turkeys and geese and ducks and chickens, and then all of her sisters that lived in town would come out and they would butcher out there, and we had at that time. Well, when I was born, my dad was could do carpenter work, so he built a house, and we had a really nice big home.
Really?
Out on the farm at that time, and they'd come out there and they'd do the butchering. And my dad had a smokehouse, and he would smoke uh, everybody's meat, and then different people, and then mom and the aunts would do an awful lot of canning and stuff, and I don't know if this is interesting, but I can remember having a little dog that I just loved, and he hated the salesman. No salesman got out of the car at our house.
Really?
Because the little dog was there to.
Do you remember what the dog's name was?
No.
Did you have a dog? Okay.
And the same dog, one day I decided I was going to go visit the neighbors, and I started to walk down the road, and the dog wouldn't let me go. He kept going in front of me, and
He wanted you to stay.
I don't remember. Probably nothing credible.
When you think back to your childhood, what was it like growing up on the prairie?
Well, my dad was the kind of person that liked to go, and I don't think I was very happy. We had lots of relatives close by, and we went to visit them a lot, and we never ever missed going to church. And we'd go to town, and I had two grandpas living in town, and we'd visit them and stuff, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Was that something you would do on a Sunday, or would you do that any day of the week, or?
Well, like I say, our farming was very little, and then on Sundays we didn't go to town so much because we went to country church.
Okay.
And that, well, the minister had 5 churches, so he was only there every 5th Sunday.
Okay.
And that Sunday we would go to the church and during the summer lots of times we'd go there too. And in the winter we'd go with the horse and sled, and in the summer we'd go with the buggy. But we had talking about Sundays, my great grandfather was was in with the group that formed the first Congregational Church in North Dakota.
Really?
It's called Gnadenfeld, and that was southwest of Cullen.
Really?
So I mean, that meant an awful lot. And my mom's family also didn't live too far from that church. Went to the same church.
So was your great grandfather alive at all when you were a child?
No,
or?
Yes, but I really don't remember an awful lot about him. He lived with an aunt of mine, but I remember both of my grandfathers real well.
Okay.
But I don't remember too much about my great grandfather.
Do you know how old your great-grandfather lived to be? About?
He was well in his 80s.
That's pretty good for that time.
Yeah.
That's real good. Oh.
And both of my grandfathers lived to be old, but
Really?
well, my one grandmother died in 1923 and the other one in 1924, so I didn't get to know them at all.
Okay.
So,
Huh.
but we had, I suppose, because it was, very important too. They had a couple of his brothers that lived close to the church, and we'd always go to church there, and of course, his grandparents were buried at that cemetery.
What was your great-grandfather's name?
August Mueller.
Okay.
And my grandpa was John Mueller.
John, okay.
And my dad's name was John Mueller.
Really? That seems to be a tradition, I think, with a lot of German families.
My parents, my mother, there was, like I say, just never ever really talked an awful lot about a lot of things. They lived south of Cullum for a few years. Well, they got married in 1904, and then they lived on the farm, and then in 1914 they moved to Idaho. Really? Because everything around Cullum was taken up and you couldn't afford to buy anything.
Okay.
So they homesteaded in Idaho for 5 years, close to Aberdeen.
Okay.
Idaho.
Okay. Yep.
And then after the 5 years, in all those years they didn't have a decent crop.
Really?
So they came back to North Dakota. Now, one of Dad's sisters and one of Mom's sisters always lived in Idaho. I still have cousins out in Idaho.
Okay.
And then they came back. Then they bought the place that I was born and grew up.
Really?
And they had dug out. There was a kind of a hill, and they had dug that out and put wood on the inside and wood on top, and that's what they lived in until Dad got the house built.
When did your dad build the house? Do you remember?
When he built the house
Mm-hmm.
in 1921. It wasn't quite done when I was born.
Okay. Do you remember what the house looked like? If you could describe it.
The house is on.
Do you? Okay. We'd like to. When we take a break, we'd love to see
Yeah.
that. How many rooms was it?
It was a big house. It had an upstairs, and it had a good-sized built-in porch. Then it had a kitchen and a dining room and a front room and a bedroom on the first floor. And when my oldest brother got married, he worked for a different person.
Okay.
And they lived in the upstairs for about a year.
Okay. So him and his wife.
My first nephew was born while they lived there.
Really?
With us, and then of course they had a home with their own.
How old were you when your first nephew was born?
Let's see, I was born in 21, and he was born in 1933.
Okay. What was that like for you, having a baby around?
Yeah. I thought it was neat having. I didn't mind him having them around at all.
So growing up, did you have your own room? Or
yes.
Yeah, you had your own room. Did all your brothers have their own room? The ones that still lived at home, or did they share?
No, well, one of the bedrooms upstairs was real big, and that had 2 beds in it.
Okay.
And then the other one of them, they kind of was my bedroom, and then one was quite small. They had 3 beds, and then there was one room that they didn't fix up, and that's the room where they stored things in.
Okay.
My dad would go. They had a mill in Cullum where they ground flour.
Okay.
And in the fall of the year, he'd go in and he'd take wheat in and bring flour home for a whole year. And then I guess maybe they run out sometimes, but anyway, they did the same thing with sugar.
Okay.
So that was all stored in this
And that
extra room.
okay.
And then there was even an attic above the.
So it was a really large home then. And it had a basement, you said? Did it have a basement?
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
It had a basement, and that's where all the butchering was done. And all the other relatives didn't have that big a place. And besides, Dad loved doing that type of thing. Anyway.
Is the house still standing?
Yes, but when after we moved into town, one of my brothers lived there for a while, and then when he decided to move to town and sell Ford cars, then they kept the land, but they sold the house, and it's somebody moved it to North of Cullum.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's still there. Somebody's still living in it.
Great. How did your family heat the house? What would they use to heat the house?
We had between the front room and dining room, there was a furnace in the basement, and it had a big square, and it was built up. So half of it, the furnace was towards the front room, and half was to the dining room.
Oh, okay.
And then in the kitchen, of course, Mom had a kitchen range.
Okay.
Too.
So were the upstairs rooms really, really cold?
Well, not really, because the door to the upstairs was right close to where that furnace came up.
Oh, okay.
And they had the door open, and then the upstairs wasn't.
So your dad did a good job with getting it designed to heat the...
It was in line so that I can remember that once in a while when the weather was real bad, I sleep downstairs. It was quite cold upstairs, but by that time the boys were pretty well gone that I can remember.
Okay. Thinking about the environment that you grew up in, what did you find especially beautiful about the Plains environment?
Just everything, really. I mean, we had quite a few hills, and there were always a lot of wildflowers, and I can remember enjoying seeing the cattle out in the pastures and stuff, and spending time with people. I had lots of neighbors, and when I went to school, we had there were 5 of us that were in that class in the same grade, and the one family lived quite close, and I used to when I'd go to school. Well, the first couple of years, Paul still went to school, but after I was alone, I'd go to school horseback.
Really?
And it was cold, but when it was nice, then we'd walk, because there were 2 other families that, well, we lived a half a mile off the road, and one family lived half a mile this way, and the other one lived quite close. And the 3 families would get together and walk to school together. And we had, if the weather was bad, then sometimes we kind of get together with going to school too. So
were they girls neighbors, or were they boys?
Well, yeah, these 2 that were the closest were girls.
Okay.
And when we were in school, the 3 girls in our class always tried to make it rough for the 2 boys that were in our class. So we'd always argue. I don't know if I should admit it.
When you would ride your horse, did you ride with a saddle, or did you go bareback?
No, I rode with a saddle.
Saddle.
And one time I was going home, and I was going to there was a place where I could have a little bit of a shortcut, and I was going to take that shortcut, and it was quite it was going down a hill, and it was quite icy, and horse slipped on the ice and fell, and then I couldn't get on the horse alone. They'd always help me at home and at school. And I walked home, and when I got home, I only had one shoe on. I can remember that. It was about half a mile.
Oh my
I
goodness.
walked home. I didn't even realize that I didn't have the shoe on.
Well, and if it was icy out too, then it must have been during the winter months.
Yeah.
Oh.
So
Did your foot have any sores on it from walking home?
I can't remember. That must have been too bad.
Yeah. Oh. Was there anything that you found especially unpleasant about the plains environment?
No, I don't think so. It was just nothing else that we knew, you know, and talking about unpleasant, and one time, I don't remember, I was still in the lower grades, then my brother came to get us from school, and he had these other two families too, and we were standing on the back of the buggy, and he was going down not much of a slope, but a little bit of a hill, and there was a rut, and the buggy slid, and I fell down between the front and the back wheel, and it went over my leg. And the next morning, the teacher almost laid an egg when I came to school because she thought I'd gotten hurt bad.
You got lucky.
It was so muddy and stuff, you know, that it didn't. I can remember being black and blue, but
nothing
never
broken
went to the
or
doctor or anything.
You got lucky. What were the winter months like during your childhood?
What was what?
Winter like.
Yucky. I really can't say that they especially bothered me. Like I say, the weather had to be real bad for us not to go to church, and we had in the winter time, even if there was no snow, we'd go with the wagon that had a good sized box on any of these wagons they have now, and they'd put hay and stuff in the bottom.
Okay.
And then we had a rock that was about this big, about this thick, that we'd heat up, and we'd lay on there, and then we'd put our feet on that, and we kept warm. And I can't remember that I'd ever say that I minded going. It was, you know, you got out. And we do that too when we'd go to visit neighbors in the evening or stuff. We'd warm up that rock and put it on the bottom. And I can't remember if we probably did too when we'd go with the buggy. But then we'd get to church. There was a barn there, and it wasn't very big. So the people that came from the farthest got to put their horses in the barn. The ones that lived close by tied their horses up alongside of their vehicle, and sometimes they'd have hay left when they went home, and sometimes they didn't. And we had in our church there at Nonfeld, the stove they had there had a flat top, and we'd take that rock in and lay it up on top of the stove so that it would be warm to go home then too. So that, but my mother had a brother that lived quite close to church, and Dad had a brother that lived in that area too. So quite often after we church, we'd visit either one or two of the other families.
Okay.
Because going like 5-6 miles in the winter was quite a chore sometimes.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
But as far as really bad blizzards, though, I can't remember that they bothered me when I was little.
Okay. What about the summer months? What were the summer months like?
Busy. You know, Mom always had a big garden, and Mom helped outside a lot, even, you know, then, and like I say, some of my brothers weren't home by the time I can remember. And they'd always plant a lot of sweet corn for all these relatives that lived in town, and Mom always raised her own turkeys and chickens, and talking about what I remember one real bad storm that we had. It rained really, really hard, and the turkeys were about half grown, and they flocked together. And after the storm was over, there were a lot of them that were dead. They were piled up alongside of a fence, and that's where they had run. And I can remember that. That was kind of a negative part of it, but
Yeah.
Other than that, I always enjoyed living there.
What was your favorite season of the year?
I think probably in the fall when school started. I always looked forward to going to school.
Did your parents encourage all of your brothers and you to go to school, or what was the expectation as far as school?
My brothers just went through the 8th grade.
Okay.
Never went. And then when I was through the 8th grade, then I had one of my brothers living in town. So then I went to high school, and then the year I was a junior in high school, my parents sold the farm to one of my brothers, and we moved into town.
Okay.
So my junior and senior year lived in town in Fellow.
Okay.
And I don't know, but when Mom and Dad moved into town, we had some neighbors that weren't farming much anymore, and they had a granary, a pretty good-sized granary that they were going to sell, and Dad bought that granary, moved it into the house, and remodeled it into a house for us in town then. And it was, they stuccoed it on the outside, and we had 3 rooms and an attic, and my bedroom was up in the attic, and that was colder than it was on the farm.
Really? Yeah.
And we never had in our house a bathtub. And in the corner of the bedroom is where they had kind of steps like that to go up into the attic.
Mhm.
And it was in front of those steps we did have a stool, so we had toilet facilities in the house, but the only sink we had was in the kitchen. After we lived in town.
Okay. Is that house still standing as well?
No, quite a few years ago, that house was sold, and it was moved down close to Allendale to a lake, and it's a summer home for somebody. The last I knew, somebody used it yet in the summer when they'd go on weekends to go out to the lake and stuff.
We talk about you mentioned knowing both of your grandfathers fairly well.
Yeah, oh yeah.
What was your dad's father's name?
John.
John, and what was he like, if you had to describe him?
He was a little fat man. And he what I remember, by the time I remember Grandpa Mueller, he was living with an aunt, and he lived quite a private life. This aunt had a stepson from a previous marriage, and him and Grandpa didn't see eye to eye. So Grandpa spent an awful lot of time in his room. But he had a nice big room, and we'd go there. We could go into that room and visit with him. But as far as him ever giving us anything, he didn't.
Okay.
When my other grandpa, he lived in Cullum alone until he wasn't able to. But we never ever stopped to see Grandpa Daring that he didn't give us candy. And I know one time somebody said, well, Grandpa Mueller would like to do that too, but Harold always swipes the candy if he does buy some. So, you know, he didn't have that opportunity to.
What did your grandfathers do? Were they farmers originally?
Yes.
They were both farmers. Were you very close to both of your grandfathers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Do you know how many children did your Grandpa Miller and your Grandma Miller have?
Well, there too, I've got a picture that I can show you.
Okay.
There was Uncle Gus and Uncle Gottfried and Dad and Uncle Nathaniel and Uncle Paul. There were 6 boys. One of them died real young.
6 boys.
And 4 girls.
So 10 children. Quite a large family.
Yeah.
How about on your mom's side? How many brothers and sisters did your mom have?
Mom had 2 brothers and 4 sisters.
2 brothers and 4 sisters?
And Mom was the oldest. So when she was growing up, then the second one was a girl too. So by the time Mom was a little bit older, then Grandma and Grandpa lived in town then, and she was a babysitter for people in Cullum.
Okay.
You know, that was
Brought
some of
in.
the things that she did.
Brought in some extra money for the family.
So, and I guess the Hulda that they gave me, Mom's youngest sister's name was Hulda, and I was named after her.
Okay.
She was kind of a favorite of my mom's.
Okay. You mentioned that one of your dad's brothers died when he was young. Did he die when he was a baby, or was there an accident?
No, he got some kind of a sickness that went around, you know, and he must, I think he looks on that picture like he was about 5, 6 years old.
Okay, so he
died.
Died in his childhood
Yeah.
then. Okay. Were you close to any of your aunts and uncles?
I liked them all, but I had some cousins that I was real close to. I didn't have a sister, so I had several cousins that, well, the one cousin that her and I were real close, she didn't have a sister either. And then another one of my cousins that was close, you know, we lived in the farm, and we didn't, the only place we got to town was to visit, because we even went to the country church. I didn't know any of the kids that were in high school, and I can remember this one cousin of mine. She had always lived in town, and she sure made it easy for me to get to know the other kids. And
that's nice when you have that.
really appreciated having her.
What was her name?
Pardon?
What was her name?
Her name was Hilda Daring.
Okay.
And then my other cousin that I was very, very close to, her name was Phyllis Brisky.
Okay. Were they close to your age as well then?
Hilda was, you know, she was a freshman in high school when I was.
Okay.
She was in the same, and Phyllis was a couple of years younger. But one reason why, like I said, she didn't have any sisters. She had one brother that was quite a bit younger. And one reason why we got to, after Grandpa Daring couldn't stay alone anymore, they lived with him.
Okay.
So then, of course, we went to town, but we never went home unless we stopped to see Grandpa. And then
you always saw
got
her.
to be real close to her that way.
Okay. Let's see here. You mentioned visiting a lot. Were there any times or events that the entire family would get together for?
4th of July.
4th of July? What was that like?
Well, Well, we all just get together and we'd have with the whole family and lots of times neighbors, and we had one neighbor that always made sure he had some was mostly firecrackers at that time, but it would just be a big picnic. And another thing we did but that was with some of the cousins, uh, we'd go fishing. There was a lake south of Column there, and we'd go fishing there once in a while.
So did you
get together?
Did you do a lot of fishing then growing up yourself?
Not an awful lot, but I don't remember catching fish.
What thinking back to your parents, what is your father? Well, first, what's your father's name?
John.
John. And where was he born?
My dad was born in Germany.
Okay.
And then they went to Russia, and he came to the United States when he was 7 years old.
Okay.
And I don't remember exactly. I've got some of that down to how they
came over.
But they came. They had somehow or other they knew somebody that lived at Parks in South Dakota.
Okay.
And then through them they came up to Allendale was a town at that time already. And then they homesteaded, and when that was before Cullum was there, and they go to Allendale to get groceries and coal and stuff at first.
Okay.
And then later, after when I can remember, when we lived in this bigger house already and stuff, we had a mail route, and there were 3 John Muellers on that same mail route. And my dad was the first one. So if a letter just said John Mueller, it was put in our box. And then if he opened it up, he'd know if it was
which one it needed to go to.
And my dad did not have a middle name.
Okay.
But he added the J so that they would know. So John J was my dad, and the others, one was John H and one was John S. And then they knew. But I can remember, Dad getting lots of letters, and then when he'd open it up, then he'd always know which one of them, because one was a big farmer and the other one was older already and didn't farm much and stuff, so we could always tell
where it needed to go.
where it needed to go.
When you think about your dad, how would you describe his character? What type of man was your dad?
And as you were, but don't remember. I'll have to tell you, he loved politics.
Really?
Here in North Dakota, they had the Nonpartisan League, they call it.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a personal friend of what was his name, Governor Bill Langer.
Yes.
In fact, he even visited at our house in Colorado.
Really?
And he would never ever read the Fargo Forum, because the Fargo Forum was against the Nonpartisan League.
Mm-hmm.
And he enjoyed people. He liked company, and he liked to go places. And he never got to know that one time when Governor Langer came, we still lived out in the country, and they came to town, and they went into town and got him out because the roads were poor. And one time he stopped at our house in town, and Mom could have cared less, but Dad really enjoyed that.
What did you think about it, having Governor Langer at your house?
I think I was pretty proud that Dad was a friend of his. I appreciated it. I enjoyed it.
That's great. So was your dad really active in the NPL party?
Well, On the local level, yes.
On the local level?
Not on the state level.
Okay.
But on the local level around Pelham he was, yes.
Okay. Okay. Was your dad a real affectionate person? Would he express a lot of affection?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
In fact, he was very protective of me. Even after I was older, I can remember one time when I was, I think, I know I was in high school already. One time, a fellow came to our house and wanted to take me out, and I didn't go because I didn't especially like the guy. And after he left, I said, "It's a good thing you didn't go because I wouldn't have let you go
anyway." Would you consider yourself a daddy's girl?
Yes.
Daddy's little girl?
Things you never had, that had the boys, and
yeah. Thinking back to your childhood, would you say you were really close to your father then?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. You've mentioned that he was a carpenter. He was also a farmer before that?
Yes. We lived on the farm, yes, and had cattle and sheep and milk cows. And
okay.
On Saturdays, they take the cream and drive to town and sell the cream and buy groceries and stuff. And he just had a knack for it. He did quite a bit of carpenter work after they moved into town for other people.
Okay.
And he liked to. I don't know if this is something I should, but anyway, he was one of those people that he could work with either his right or his left hand.
Really?
And one time we were having a get together at our house, and in fact, my oldest nephew was there, and he was bragging about Grandpa being able to use his left hand, and he was going to show one of his cousins how Grandpa can work with his left hand, and he chopped his finger off.
Oh no! What'd they end up doing? Did they go to the doctor?
They took him to the doctor.
They took him to the doctor.
And another thing, this boy whose finger was chopped off, his little brother went and took the finger and put it in his pocket. And then when they looked for it, they couldn't find it.
Oh no!
Oh. He can chop with the axe, with his left hand, right here. And of course, at that time, they didn't put it back on.
Yeah. But they went to the doctor and they were able to cover it up and fix the hair. Oh. Thinking back to your mom, first, what was your mom's name?
Louise.
Louise. And where was she born?
She was born at Parsons, South Dakota.
Okay.
Yeah, her family had was in America already when she was born, and she was the oldest of the family.
Okay. Speaking about her character, how would you describe your mom?
She was a very, very affectionate person. I was very close to my mom, and she was kind of looked down. Her sisters kind of all looked to her, for a lot of support and stuff, and all that you agree with, right? Yeah. I don't like your light. It makes me.
Oh. Let's see here. Would you say your mom was very easy to talk with? Would you talk with her a lot?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What kind of work did she do? Was she?
Well, like I said, when she was a girl, she worked for other people, and then of course, after they were married, then she had the boys, and she loved to to crochet. She did some
Really?
embroidery too. In fact, that dealie behind you there is something that she made.
She made this?
She did
Oh.
lots and lots of crocheting, and then embroidery she did some too. But after I got older, I didn't like to crochet, so she'd crochet and I would embroider.
Okay. So she taught you how to do all of that?
Yeah. In fact, this
the one that was
that I had on here, I embroidered and she crocheted around the outside.
Oh, those are nice things to have.
And she always had a big garden, and
so do you have a garden today that you tend to?
I don't anymore because my husband won't let me have one.
But you used to.
Oh yes. In fact, I had even last year I had planted a few peas and a few cucumbers yet.
Okay.
Just enough to
have a few to.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this year I sneaked a few peas in my flower bed. Picked peas. And I don't embroider anymore because of gout.
Oh, okay. In your finger.
I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of crossword puzzles.
Reading's an enjoyable.
Take care of my man.
Right?
Sometimes better than he wants me to.
Let's see here. Who would you say was the stricter parent, your dad or your mom? Who would do more of the disciplining in your house?
Well, except for going out, it was Mom.
Okay.
Dad let me get by with more things around home than what Mom did, yeah.
Okay. The youngest your oldest brother, but the youngest one to you, the older, he was 6 years difference between you and the youngest boy. Did you see differences between how they treated your brothers versus how they treated a girl? No. Thinking of.
It seems like, when they went away from home and stuff, when I grew up, one of my brothers never lived very close around, and the other one, the oldest one, was never as close to me as I had one of my brothers that lived on a farm not from where I worked with them a couple of summers while we lived in town when we were in high school.
Okay.
So he and I got to be real close.
Okay.
But that was, after.
Well, yeah.
After they were gone and stuff.
Okay.
And he was actually the second oldest one of my brothers.
And what was his name?
Pardon?
What was his name?
His name was Otto.
Otto, okay.
And I had 5 brothers and 6 sister-in-laws, and I'm the only one left of the family. My last 2 sister-in-laws just died this spring.
Really?
I used to really appreciate the fact that I was so young and had a lot of things that I could get by with that the older ones couldn't. But now that I'm alone, I don't know if it was such a good idea to.
Well, you have him now.
Yeah.
Thinking back to your parents, if you look at them as a couple, would you say they had a really good relationship with each other?
Yes, very much so.
How did they, what were the best things about how they worked with each other and lived with each other? What were the best things about?
Well, they did a lot of things like, I can remember even when we lived in the farm, and so Dad would always help, like with the butchering of the turkeys and stuff, and do his part there. And one thing that they really worked together on is church.
Okay.
It was important, And there was never a day that we didn't get together as a family and have family worship.
What religion were you raised?
Pardon?
What religion were you raised?
Congregational.
Congregational. Okay.
Yeah. And do you know much about German? That church that they started, you know, that was the first. It was called Gnadenfeld. Now, what does Gnadenfeld mean in German?
I don't know.
I've often wondered.
Gnadenfeld.
I think Feld means field.
Yeah.
And Gnaden, kind of a religious something.
I would imagine. I don't know though. I'll have to look that one up and figure out I'll figure that one out and I'll send you back and tell you what it is. Let's see.
And being that I was so much younger, there's just nobody left to ask those things anymore.
Yeah. Did your family did they speak German in the home or did you speak English?
Oh, we spoke German all
We spoke German all
many years.
Okay. Going back to your parents as a couple, when they weren't working and taking care of the family, what types of things would they do for fun?
I don't really know that anything special. Just visit the neighbors or just get together and talk and I can't remember especially that we had any games that we played or anything like that.
Okay. Looking towards your brothers, how would you describe your brothers? Their characters.
Well, they were all nice guys. I liked them all, and I got along real well with them. And then, like when I went to high school, there was 2 years that I lived with one of my brothers, and they lived in town, and we got along real well with them. They used to treat me real good, but I don't, other than that, except that, like I say, we got along real well.
Okay.
And I did have one sister-in-law that I liked less, not as well as the rest of you, but on the average, I like my sister-in-law real well too.
Good. Do you know, were all of your brothers born in the Colum area, or were some of them born over in Idaho?
Well, the youngest of them was born in Idaho.
Okay.
The 4 older ones were born south of Colum.
Okay. What did you or your brothers ever get into some mischief when you were growing up?
Well, I can't really think that my brothers and I ever got, like I say, they were so much older.
Yeah, there's that.
I can remember, I don't know, this is telling a tale out of school. I can remember once a couple of my cousins came to visit with getting into mischief. And it was a boy and a girl, and their dad smoked. And my cousins swiped my uncle's tobacco, and we went to the toilet and we rolled it into catalog paper and tried it out. And it wasn't appreciated.
What catalog?
It must have been Sears Roebuck.
We were just talking about whether or not you and your brothers had gotten into any mischief as a kid. Do you remember growing up, did you have a favorite brother or a brother that you were closest to when you were a child?
Not when I was little, because, I suppose at that time it must have been Paul, because the others were pretty well gone by the time I got older. I really didn't have an awful lot to do with them, except after I was older, when I lived with the one of them, one winter, and worked for the one of them a couple of summers. But I suppose it would be, Paul and I were close when we were younger, but there too he was quite a bit older than I was too, so.
Was Paul the one that you mentioned that you would go on dates with him and his girlfriend?
Yeah.
What was that like for you?
Well, we didn't do a heck of a lot, and I don't even remember for sure. Maybe after he picked up the girlfriend, he probably took me home.
Ditch the little
but
sister.
Actually, after the gal he got married to, he didn't get married to the one that the gal that he got married to was someone that when he was in the service, he had a real good friend that lived here at Gackle, and they got together, and somehow or other he met this gal, and she was from Gackle here.
Okay.
And that was when he was in the service already, and then they got married before he was out of the service.
Okay.
So he didn't date her an awful lot, and he was gone.
Yeah.
So he was home on furlough, and then he met her, and they started corresponding, and they got married.
Okay, when you were a young child, you said your older two brothers weren't really in the home because they were already adults. Yeah. So then, did your other three brothers live with you, or for most of your childhood?
They were at home part of the time, but I just can't really remember an awful lot of them being around a lot. That they worked for other people too.
So it was more kind of like you were an only child in the house because they were so much older than
brother,
you.
Yeah.
Okay. Did your family use any nicknames for your brothers or for you growing up? Did any of you have a nickname?
I had a nickname when I went to high school, but.
What was that?
Strawberry.
Why was strawberry? Was it your red hair?
My hair was very, very red. First thing you noticed about me.
The red hair. You've mentioned that you spoke German at home. Did you also speak English at home as well, or?
Yes. By the time I went to to grade school, we had learned some English.
Okay.
But we still talked German at home.
Okay.
And in fact, there was a lot of people around that the first year I taught country school, I had a little boy that didn't know a word of English.
Really? So there's still that tradition.
Yeah.
Huh.
And it made it handy that I could talk to him.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, that. When you went to school, were you allowed to speak German in school, or did you have to strictly speak English?
We weren't supposed to. We did sometimes speak German, but we weren't supposed to know.
What about at church? Was the services in German, or?
Yeah, we had German service. I can remember that real well.
Okay.
In fact, like up till to the time that I was confirmed, there were times that they had German confirmation.
Did you go through a German? Was your confirmation in German, or was that in English?
Mine was in English.
Yours was in English. Mm-hmm. What was confirmation like for you?
It was good. We had 4 girls and 6 boys, and one of the boys would shoot spit while at the minister, and then the wrong one got blamed for it. Had to stand in the corner. Of course, nobody told that he had the wrong one, and it was quite an experience.
It wasn't you spitting the spitwads, was it?
We were just glad we weren't in on it. Yeah.
How long did the confirmation classes last? Was it a couple weeks, or was it?
They were usually about 6 weeks, I think.
Ours are 4, but yours.
Well, maybe it was 4 weeks.
Okay.
But I started going 1 year. They used to have confirmation every other year.
Oh, okay.
And then I started 1 year, and then the class was so awfully big. So then they asked the younger ones to wait till the next year, and they had it 2 years in a row.
Oh,
So
okay.
I had some training both years.
So how old were you when you went through confirmation?
14, 15.
Okay. Did the pastor that was you said you had a pastor that would come every fifth Sunday? Was he the one that did?
No, by that time we had all of these country churches that were closed up.
Oh, okay, so you were going to Calm.
By that time we had church in town every Sunday.
Oh, okay.
And see, like out at the farm, we had church every Sunday. There was somebody that would read the service.
It just wasn't the pastor.
But the pastor was only there.
Oh, okay.
Once, so.
How would you describe your relationship with the pastor during confirmation? Was he approachable, or was he very strict and stern?
No, he wasn't very strict. He was a quiet person, or else they wouldn't have taken the did watch at him. Sometimes he would just actually ignore them.
Really? Okay.
No, because he just. I can remember seeing some laying around his chair and stuff on there and stuff.
When it came to the day you were confirmed, what type of process did you have to go through? What was did you have to read something in front of everybody, or did you have to answer questions? Or
we had to recite from memory.
Oh, okay.
They'd ask us different questions, but luckily enough, the minister told us beforehand what questions he was going to ask us.
Oh, okay. So you knew.
Some of the ministers didn't, but our minister did.
Okay.
He told us what he would ask us, and then we'd have to answer. We'd march in and be up front, and then they asked the questions and sang a couple of songs.
Do you remember about how long the congregation was that you were presenting this in front of? How large the attendance was that day?
I'm sure it was well over 100 people.
Was that pretty intimidating for you, being 14, 15?
Not really, because we knew everybody, and
okay.
Everybody. No, it didn't
okay.
bother me too much.
Did your family have like a big celebration afterwards for you, or a picnic or something?
I can remember that I think we all got together at my aunt and uncle's where my grandpa Mueller stayed.
Okay, yeah.
Got together there, because that was in town, and my folks were living out in the country at the time.
Okay.
So. It was considered a big deal, really,
Yeah, it's through the interviews we're finding that it's a pretty landmark, kind of a rites of passage into the church for a lot of children. Around your house, did any of your brothers or your father help with the cooking, cleaning, or washing? Or was that just you and your mom?
Well, I know the boys had to always make their beds. And with the washing, boys, we still had a washing machine that they had to pull the handles and stuff, and the boys had to help with that.
Okay.
As far as making the machine go.
Yeah.
But other than that, with the actual, and then putting it through a wringer into the wash tub to rinse and stuff, so they have to help with that. But the actual, other than that, they didn't.
Okay. Did you help your mom with her garden,
Oh, yes.
keeping up the vegetables?
After I got a little bit older, I had my own corner.
Really?
Yeah.
What types of things would you and your mom grow in the garden?
Everything. Peas, beans, potatoes, cucumbers. We didn't have, like, a lot of those things they have now. Well, we had celery, but, like a lot of these leafy vegetables they have now, we didn't have that at that time.
Okay.
Lettuce was about the only one. And cabbage. We had a lot of cabbage.
Make a lot of sauerkraut growing up.
Yeah. And a lot of cucumbers. A lot of pickles.
Did your father ever help with any of the household tasks?
Well, not, yeah, odds and ends of things he would help with, yeah.
Okay. Thinking about the outdoor responsibilities, what were you responsible for when you were growing up? What type of outside chores did you have to do?
Well, I had to help with feeding the chickens and the ducks and the geese and milking the cows and bringing the cows home in the evening and stuff like that. Because the boys, for the last couple of years, they weren't around at all anymore. And I helped with that, yeah.
Okay.
And I disliked milking, but I had to help with it anyway.
You know how many people say they dislike milking? The 1 or 2 times I actually did it as a child, I thought it was fun, but then it was only 1 or 2 times. So, what were your mother's outdoor responsibilities? What types of chores did she do?
Same thing that I did, yeah.
Okay. You talk about disliking milking. Was there any chores that you kind of enjoyed doing or that didn't really?
I think I enjoyed the little chickens and the ducks, I think, too. Now, the geese and the turkeys, not so much. They were bigger and the parents were more aggressive.
Yeah.
But, of course, even with the chickens, you had to watch the rooster if there was one around, But I enjoyed that.
What were the differences between your summer chores and your winter chores? Did some of the chores change, and if so, how?
Well, I mean, I didn't, help with any of the feeding with the turkeys and ducks. I didn't have to help feed in the winter, but we helped with the milking in the winter time too.
Okay.
And we were a little bit ahead of some of our neighbors. We had a well house quite close to the barn, and we had lots of water, and then they piped the water into this little building, and that's where we separated and stuff. And then sometimes they'd have a little heater in there in the wintertime, kerosene, to warm it up. And in the summertime, water would come into this tank, and we'd hang like our milk and our cream and our butter in there to keep it cool because we didn't have fridges. And then from there it would run out into the tank. Which I know a lot of the people didn't have that.
Yeah.
We did as long as I could remember.
Besides going to visit relatives and your aunts and uncles and your grandparents, did your family ever go on like an outing somewhere, like to a lake or to a pond or somewhere for a picnic, or just you and your brothers?
We used to go out, like I said, to a lake. I don't even remember if they did a heck of a lot of fishing, but we'd go there, or we had this one place where we go like for the 4th of July, or so we'd all get together and visit, and everybody would bring food. And that we did.
What type of food would you bring for 4th of July?
Well, it had to be kuha. I'm sure you've heard of German kuha. And think we took chicken a lot.
Okay.
And other than that, potato salad. Had to have potato salad. Of course, you take your vegetables and stuff like that weren't pushed as much as they are nowadays.
Okay. You've talked about your family going fishing. Did you or your family go hunting at all when you were a child?
I don't remember that the boys ever went hunting. Did you ever hear that they went hunting?
Father did.
After he was, but not while he was at home. But I think they did after they were grown up and were gone, but
Okay.
not around home. I can't remember.
Okay. When you were a child, who did you play with when you wanted to play games or do different?
I played a lot by myself, and then I had a couple of cousins that lived in Bismarck that would come and spend part of the summer.
Okay.
And we'd just play outside and play tag and stuff like that.
Did you? What types of? Well, besides tag, what types of outdoor games would you play?
Well, it was tag and what were some of the other games we played? Ring Around the Rosie and I know sometimes we'd go down and we had a place where there was water. Sometimes after it rained, we'd go down and wade around in that.
Okay.
But other than that, I think maybe even we played with a ball, but not regular baseball or anything else.
Okay.
We played ball.
What about indoor activities? What type of indoor things would you do to have fun?
Played with my dolls.
Did you have a lot of dolls?
Oh yes, I had dolls, and I don't know, but see, at that time, you know, according to the congregational religion, it was against the law to play, against the church rules to play cards. So we, not with regular decks. Later on, we had like Old Maid or something like that. But
okay.
But with the others, we parents didn't allow that.
Okay. Where was your favorite place to play when you were a kid? Did you have a favorite place where you'd go to play games or hang out or?
No, I don't think so.
Just anywhere you could have fun?
Anywhere.
Anywhere where there weren't cows to milk.
Yeah. That's about the size of it.
You'd mentioned one dog that you remember. Did you have any other pets versus
Cats.
it? You had cats?
Always had cats around. Okay. Not in the house, but we had cats around.
Do you remember your parents ever telling you like a childhood story when you were growing up, or some type of fairy tale or stories from Russia or Germany or?
No, that they didn't talk about because, well, like Mom was even born here and Dad was quite young when we came.
Okay.
I don't remember that they ever talked about anything like that.
Okay.
Or about their young days or so, I can't remember really.
Okay. Did you have any favorite songs when you were a child? A favorite song that you grew up with?
I suppose it was Jesus Loves Me.
That's a traditional one, yeah. That's a good one. Did anyone in your family play a musical instrument?
No.
Okay.
Well, Albert and Paul not, but Edwin and especially Otto and Alden, they would sing in quartets and stuff.
Oh, okay.
They sang.
So they did a lot of singing.
Especially Otto sang a lot, and they had quartets in Cullen for a long time that he sang in.
Okay. When you grew up, were there any superstitions that you grew up with? Or scary stories that your brothers would tell to scare you a little bit? Or
Can't remember any.
okay. Let's see here. We talked about hunting and fishing already. Wanted to talk about grade school. Okay. You've mentioned briefly school a couple times. When did you, or what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a child? What did you think? You wanted to be a nurse?
But of course, when I graduated from high school, there was no possibility that there was just no money, and then but a nurse is what I thought. In fact, one summer I stayed with an aunt in Bismarck and worked as a nurse's aide in the hospital one summer, and that I would have liked to have done. But then I started teaching, and I enjoyed that too.
When did you start going to school? How old were you when you started going to school?
6.
6.
Mm-hmm.
How you've talked about how you got to school. How was the attendance in your school? Was there a pretty steady attendance, or okay?
Yeah,
Was it pretty regular, or would
Yes.
kids miss school often?
No.
Or? No. Okay. Did your parents ever keep you out of school to help around the house or help around the farm or anything?
No.
What about with your brothers? Did they ever do that? Do you know?
They probably did, but not the.
No.
I don't remember.
Okay. Did you speak English before you started school? Mm-hmm. So it was an easier transition for you than to go in.
Yeah, I think I would have preferred German.
But you were familiar with it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I had these cousins that came and stayed with us. They got Dad's sister got married to this fellow from Bismarck, and he wasn't German, so they never learned to talk German. So when they were there, we had to talk German.
You had to speak, yeah. Okay. What school did you go to for grade school? Was it a county, like a
out in the country?
Out in the country, a country school. So was it a one-room schoolhouse then?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you remember did you have the same teacher all the way through the 8th grade, or
No.
Did you have a number of different teachers?
I was, well, since you called, I've been thinking about it, and I really can't remember. I know this one teacher that I liked real well, the one that I got one picture of out there. But then for the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we had the same teacher, the same man.
Okay.
And I think there was a lot to be desired as far as he was concerned, because most of the girls didn't especially like him. I don't know if the boys did or not, but I know they weren't very impressed with him.
Was he a strict teacher?
Yes.
Or?
Mm-hmm.
How were students disciplined in school if they acted out?
Well, it wasn't like it is now. They used to use ruler on your hands and stuff, and well, of course, I was never naughty. But no, he was the lower grades. I can't really remember, but everybody was pretty well. We just had to behave, and I think he laid down the line, and everybody pretty well stuck to it.
When you think back to that one-room schoolhouse, how was it set up when you walked in? What was the building like?
Well, you walked in, and there was a bunch of desks on this side and a bunch of desks on that side, and the teacher's desk was up front, and there was a blackboard, and like the first thing you did in the morning was, of course, at 9 o'clock, if it was nice, you'd say the pledge the flag outside, and if it wasn't, then you'd say it inside, and there was an entry in our school, a wall in between, and then the girls hung their clothes and stuff on one side, and the boys on the other side. The dinner pails were lined up along the wall, and you bring your own food and your own water, and the food was mostly in syrup pails.
Okay.
And then in the evening, if you had any water left, you left it there that you used to wash your hands and stuff the next day.
Oh.
That way it didn't, everybody. And of course, the toilets were outside,
Okay.
and the coal shed was outside. Okay. Of course, the teacher always had to see to it but I can remember that sometimes some of the boys would get in cold for the teacher, and in our school we had a lot of them had these round stoves at the round top, but we didn't. We had a flat top, and sometimes we could take. I remember taking a potato along and put it on top there, and then we'd have a hot potato for dinner.
Okay.
But other than that, as far as when I went to school, that was. And then, one corner always had a library where they had books in that you could take out. And
Do you remember any of the books that you read when you were a child?
not really.
Did you have books in your house when you were a child, when you were growing up? Did your parents have any
Not
books?
when I was real. The only thing, I don't think we had any English books in the house when I was little.
Okay.
We had German books, but not English, not.
Were you taught to read German as well as speak it?
Pardon?
Could you read German as well?
Printed German, but written German I didn't.
Okay.
In fact, I have a book that I have different birthdays in, and for some reason or other, my mother wrote two things in there in German, and so as far as the writing, I didn't.
Okay. How many students were at the school? What was the teacher distinguished?
There was usually about between 15 and 20.
Okay.
Some years a few more, some years a few
Few
less.
less.
Because the class I was in, there were 5 of us, so then the next year I suppose it was a little bit smaller probably.
When you think back to your school, were there more males than females, or was it pretty even? Or
I think it was pretty even.
okay. Did you complete the 8th grade at the country school before you moved to town?
Yeah. I was a sophomore in high school.
When your parents built that, that's
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Junior and senior year, my parents lived in town.
Okay. Do you out of the teachers that you remember, is there one that sticks out in your head as being a really good teacher, like a favorite teacher you had?
Well, no, not as far as. I can remember one high school teacher that I did like, but I can't remember any that I, liked better than the rest of them. I got along with all of them.
Okay. Did you have a lot of homework when you were a child, or did you have homework when you were a child?
We had homework, but never really bothered me.
What type of homework would you have? What would you have to do in the home?
Well, with different classes. Like when first year I went to school in town, I know my cousin and I would get together and do. I hated math. Still do.
Me too.
Richard never went to high school, but he was the one that that knew math better than I did.
Oh,
I like biology.
really?
Mm-hmm. There too, anything science I liked.
Oh. See, not me. I didn't like that.
I suppose that was probably one reason why I thought I'd like to
Be a nurse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did your parents ever help you with homework?
No.
Before the interview started, we talked about how you had to have a Christmas program while you were teaching. But when you were going to school, did they have Christmas programs?
Yep.
What was that like? What was a
Well,
typical?
everybody would learn something, and you'd have a play, and everybody came, and then they'd have a basket social afterwards.
Oh, what's a basket social?
The ladies, the schoolgirl, and some of the ladies from the community would bring baskets with food in them, and then they would auction them off.
Oh.
And the money would go to the school to buy books and stuff, and of course, all of the young men would want to buy the teachers' baskets. Sometimes they were quite high. And then they'd always try and keep it from the people which one was the teachers. And that happened too when I taught school too.
Huh. Never heard of that. That's great. What type of social activities were allowed during recess or the noon hour? What type of things would the kids do?
Anything they could think of. I can remember we had a slough that was quite close, and then the teacher would allow us to go down there and skate on the ice when it was real cold. That I can remember. And played ball, that we did a lot.
Do you remember what other holidays were celebrated in the school? Was Halloween or Easter or anything celebrated?
Yeah, we always had a little bit of extra going on, and probably brought a little treat for the kids or something.
Okay.
Always had Easter eggs. That always had nothing big.
Okay. How about what was the most scariest thing that you ever experienced? Something that was scary for you?
Well, I don't know, but I can vaguely remember when I was quite young, and we had water problems, and they were digging a well, and there was a man down in the well, and he was overcome from gases, and I can remember that that was pretty scary for all of us,
Yeah. Huh. Was he a friend of the family, or?
No, it was someone that they had hired.
Oh, okay.
No, it wasn't. I don't remember if we knew him at all, but it wasn't anybody in the family.
Okay. What about the happiest thing that you experienced in your childhood? A happy time?
I don't know. I think they were all happy. Later on, I guess one of the happiest experiences I had was getting married to Paul here.
How did you two meet?
I was teaching school up here.
Okay.
And you were at home, right? And then there was one place where they'd get together a lot, and it wasn't too far from where I taught, and they had invited me over for supper, and you were there too. I think it was just...
We were thrashing.
Yeah, we were thrashing, and and it's really kind of funny, because one of the first things that I can remember is I admired his hair. He had beautiful, wavy hair, and I really, that was, so he'll get around to it too. He always says that's the first thing that he'd like, my red hair.
How long after you two met did you get married?
see, we met and then he went to the service and then got
Okay.
married after about 4 years, I suppose.
So you got married after you got back from the war. Okay. During your childhood, what was the most adventurous thing you ever did?
In our whole past,
When you were a kid. Anytime.
we used to go to Bismarck to visit a lot. Mom had a sister up there, and Dad had a sister up there, and I think that was probably the most exciting, for us to get away. We'd go up there. There were times we'd take the train from Cullum and go to Bismarck.
Oh, that'd be fun.
And visit for a few days. I imagine that would. And my aunt that lived at Bismarck, she was a seamstress, and then quite often she'd get hand-me-down clothes, so then I'd always get something new it was new to me, some clothes from her, and things that she had made, and I always enjoyed that. And like when I taught school there too, there was I had 20 students was the most that I had. And of course, they didn't always have all grades, but almost all. And I can remember the last year I taught school, we even had an organ at the school. And it so happened that I had an 8th grade girl that could play it. And we really made use of that. She played the organ.
So when you were teaching, it was also in a one-room schoolhouse as well?
Yeah, I taught 6 years. And well, it just so happens that I did teach it in different places, because always at the end of the year, I'd say, well, I'm not going to teach again, and then by fall, they had such a hard time to get teachers, and they would come and ask me again. So I taught west of Fredonia 1 year, and then I taught south of Cullum a year, and then I taught southwest of Cullum, and then the school up here, and then we got married, and we lived on a farm a mile north and a half a mile east is where we lived first.
Okay.
And then from the junction up there, half a mile, or is it a mile down, there was a schoolhouse. Okay. And I taught that school the first year we were married then. So
the schoolhouse that you went to when you were a child, and you went through the 8th grade, is that still standing, or is that still around?
The one I went to? No.
No, that was taken down.
I don't know what happened to it. We've driven down there, and it's gone. I don't know where it went to. Okay. And the farm I lived on, the last time that we went down, the windmill was still there, right? On the place that I grew up. But the rest of the buildings, there aren't. I suppose we didn't drive up to the building because it's about a half a mile in, and we didn't really know who the land belongs to now or anything, and this basement house that we had, that could possibly be there. But see, later on, they put a building on top, and half of it was creamery, and the other half was to put the car in.
Oh.
That we used to live down the basement.
Okay.
But I really, that was, I was already born in the house, so that was before. In this big house that I showed you, I was born, they were working on that.
Okay.
When I was born, so I don't remember living in there, but I remember them talking about it.
What about the old country church that you went to? Is that still standing, or is that one?
No, it's not where it used to be. Somebody bought it, and they were going to make a museum out of it. And then the people that got it, they both got sick, and neither one are living anymore, so it's just an abandoned building at a farm
Oh, okay.
down south of Cullum.
Okay. What about, I haven't been to Colum yet, so is the high school still there that you attended? Or,
Yes.
yeah, is it still has current classes?
In fact, Cullum has a better school, more students than what Gackle is.
Does it? And Gacko?
They have the old school building is strictly high school, and then they I suppose maybe 25 years ago they built an elementary school, and they're still both operating.
Okay.
And see, like they had more in the first grade in Cullum in school than a lot of the schools around here this year.
Huh.
So, it's a big area that people, well, Fredonia, all of Fredonia goes over there, and then Ashley's a long ways, and Allendale's a long ways. Of course, Edgeley's quite close, but
Yeah.
and then Judd closed their school, so they had Judd kids going down there,
Okay.
which helps.
Yeah. Well, now Streeter's going to Gackle now. I know that. So, huh.
And they have an alumni association at Cullum,
Okay.
and I'm not sure I'm a member of that.
I saw that on your list.
And they have an alumni banquet every year, always the last Saturday in June.
Really?
They have, the last time I went was for our 55th, and then there were only 3 of us there out of our class, and there were, what was it, 21 in our class when I graduated. And, so,
Pretty good sized class.
yeah, well, they were all about that. See, Gackle
Okay.
used to have, like when Gary and Ellen graduated, they both had over 20 in their class.
Okay. Hmm.
And this year they had 16. So.
Why do you think it's important to tell your life story?
I don't know, I never did really think about it. But I did kind of enjoy it. So.
Are there any other thoughts or observations that you would like to share?
Yeah. Tonight when I can't sleep, I'll think of something. Right now I can't.
And then, is there anyone else that you would like to suggest for us to interview?
Well, we had talked about Emil Schaefer, but
Yep, we're interviewing him our next time out.
So I can't think of anybody. Can you? I suppose you were Art Schmidt. Are you interviewing him?
I don't think so. I
thought maybe. See, he's yeah, his wife passed away, so. But he's a relative of Elmer's.
No, I don't think he had. Let's see here.
His wife and Alma Shop were brother and
Sisters. Okay.
But maybe it could be that he probably wouldn't have wanted to.
No, I don't even have him as a suggested.